any plant, if you're ever doing research on a plant and it says it's full of saponins or saponins, think when you make soap, what's the process called? Saponification. That's what you're getting. Those are large soap, what are called soapy molecules. And those are what act as anti-inflammatories. Not only anti-inflammatory, they act as a cleansing, not an antibiotic, but more like an antiseptic. That's why if you take the yucca root, and we ought to take some of the leaves down to the water, and you can make a soapy type of soap with it. It's not, big tons of lather, but it's a real cleansing. You can feel the difference, and you can see the soap molecules coming out of it, and it's just a real cleansing, healing. So if you got like a bad cut, or you cut yourself with a machete, this is a good one to keep it from getting infected. Doesn't necessarily heal it, doesn't necessarily, do anything, but it keeps the germs from taking hold. It's sort of like, getting the alcohol, gelled alcohol, and putting it on. But that's why it works for arthritis. Does not work for rheumatoid arthritis. It's got to be for just general osteoarthritis. Very good for that. In fact, y'all familiar with the Nature Sunshine Company? Mm-hmm. That was probably one of the first herbs they encapsulated. They got known for was just yucca root in a capsule, and that was it. But you can use the leaves too. They're not as soapy as the root, but they can be. And then even the fruit will do the same thing. But if you take the must be over there. If you take, how you can find this is one that's native. This is what they call bear grass. A lot of people don't realize we got 3 varieties of yuccas that grow from Florida all the way up through New York and New Jersey that are they're East Coast yuccas. It's just like these little dinky prickly pears we've got here. They're native too. They're just not the big beautiful ones like you see from out west. And so these are called bear grass because you could string your meat up with them. Make your rope. But what I want you to notice is, see all the little fibers there? If you're to take that, soak this in water, what you're going to end up with is that all that outer part will rot off, this green part. And what you end up with are all these little blonde inner fibers. And that's what you can make your bowstrings, fishing line with, and it is super strong. We've made vegetable bowstrings with this before that lasted a long time. But you can take this even green, strip it down, get a twist started in it, let it go back on itself, and just do a reverse wrap and make real quick. Have you ever heard of tump lines, like for hauling packaging? Put on your head. You see what Guatemala's doing. It's like real good for making tump lines and tying up things with it. Because once it's wrapped around itself in a reverse wrap, let me do it real quick. You're not going to break it easily. Sean, you look strong. Do you eat breakfast? Good. All right. Come break this for me. You break it, it'll break at a weak spot, but not where it's been corded up. It shouldn't. Even green, it should be okay. Now out west, the Indians didn't use things like rawhide. No, down south they didn't use things like rawhide for bowstrings as much because it absorbed moisture and will stretch. Out west they did. But even out west, this was one of the preferred cordages. Let's even break it right into there. And didn't do it real tight. It took a lot of strength, even with that loose wrap, didn't it? Yeah. They get very strong, and once it dries, it's even stronger. But if you notice, these will send a stalk about so tall, real small, and then it'll have those white flowers with a green, what is it, calyx, I think, on the back of it. If you take the petals, you can eat them. They're really good. Just don't eat the green because it's bitter. And then when it goes to fruit, when it's still green, you can open it up and, it really varies from plant to plant, but it has a pulp in it that's sweet. that you can eat. And then of course you can do the the stalk for hand drill and bow drill as well.
Is anything with saponins good for arthritis?
Pretty much, yeah. Anything with those large soapy molecules are anti-inflammatory. And that's the neat thing about it. And a lot of plants are either anti-inflammatory because of the saponins, I call them saponins either way, tomato, tomato, or from having phytoestrogens in them, like kudzu, wild yam, black cohosh, or the ones that have an estrogenic or progesterone type action are all going to be anti-inflammatory. Now that doesn't mean like for arthritis they'll work for rheumatoid arthritis other than for the inflammation, whereas if you've got rheumatoid arthritis, what are you wanting to use?
Poke root.
Poke root. What else? Something that'll help reset the immune system to modulate it. Anything?
Echinacea.
To an extent, echinacea. How about wild yam?
No.
So wild yam is an anti-inflammatory, but it also helps. It's very mild, but it helps with modulating the immune system. First one is poke root, though, most definitely. But this is
saponins. Is it internal or external?
internal.
Internal.
Internal use, yeah.
And how do you spell that?
S-A-P-O-N-I-N, saponin. That's why when you talk about people making soap, it's called a saponification process. Sawbriar, sarsaparilla, smilax, and what's in it?
Precursors to steroids.
Precursors to steroids. So if you go to the doctor and you got something wrong with you and they don't know what to do for you, nurse, what do? They give you a steroid, some form of a steroid, because what does a steroid do? It reduces swelling, but it also basically masks symptoms until your body heals itself. But if you take steroids too much, what's going to happen? Eat like a hog, blow up like a hog. Whereas with this, because they're the steroid precursors, you don't. It's actually good for the liver. That's why guys use it for building muscle mass when they go work out. Get the tincture of Smilax at GNC, because it has that anabolic steroid action without having the anabolic steroid side effects. It actually does build muscle mass in men. It helps them to increase, I think it's like 8 to 15% increase in muscle mass for men.
Only for men?
Women, it builds breast tissue. Just use them in herbal bust enlargers. Does not build muscle mass that I have ever seen any studies or anything done on at all. Now, this is the second thing. Like if you've got somebody with IBS of any sort, as you report, for the griping or gripping, stabbing, twisting of the colicky pains, in the intestines, because of the steroid precursors, they're anti-inflammatory, and it stops the inflammatory process going on. And it also inhibits the histamine reaction, so that you don't, it's not as fast as wild yam, but it's pretty quick. You just boil it and make a tea, and it's actually a fairly good tasting tea. It's one of the ingredients in root beer. But this is the one, we'll look at it some more and talk a little bit more about when we see the leaves here in a minute. Now, as you can see, Skip's got this all throughout the property. Any idea?
Winter huckleberry.
That's what they call it. You know what they call it in Cherokee? You want a Cherokee lesson? Mm-hmm. In Cherokee, they call this winter huckleberry. Alright, pass it and smell that. But you can always tell it when you cut it. Look how obvious the green is in that. That shade of green is sort of, I won't say it's solely in winter huckleberry, but it's just sort of a look that you know. But even more so, smell it. You can tell the smell. It'll vaguely, if you stretch your imagination when it's green, huh?
Smells like fermented sorghum.
It does, doesn't it? Or cabbage. When you boil it, it does smell like cabbage, and you can always tell it. Uses.
Good for prostate.
Prostate. Wasn't the first answer I was looking for, but it was going to be one I was going to discuss. What else?
Something Blood pressure.
sugar.
Blood pressure and blood sugar. Talked to a guy yesterday, did a consultation with him, and he's got what's called essential hypertension. Anybody have an idea what that is? That is basically hypertension with no known cause. You just have it. He eats, doesn't drink, doesn't use caffeine, eats healthy, raises bees, uses bee products, and his blood pressure runs high all the time. You know why? Luck of the draw, just the way it is. You know, nobody knows. And he uses the winter huckleberry. I showed it to him before, and it more or less keeps it from getting real bad. I suspect he's not using as much as he says he is, but his cousin who lives in Florida is using it, and it completely keeps her blood pressure from spiking. Loves it, you know, but it's working better for her. So I'm gonna have to get back with him and see just exactly, you know, how he's using. We discussed it some yesterday, but this is probably the first plant I'd recommend for high blood pressure and high blood sugar.
You said that it kept hers from spiking. Does it normalize blood pressure or does it reduce blood pressure?
It normalizes.
So would it also work on someone with low blood pressure?
Yes. Now, and it does the same thing with diabetes too, whether it's high or whether it's low. It's like a thermos. Hot things hot, cold things cold. How do it know? It does. Typically, you use it on people with high blood pressure and high blood sugar for one simple reason. That's mostly what people have issues with. They don't tend to be low blood sugar and low blood pressure. You know, though there's some people that are. And it tends to regulate both. Works really, really well. These are the ones where I always tell the story where Jane and I went to the Grand Canyon one year and took the train from Williams up to the canyon, met a couple that from California, and the guy said, listen, I don't eat right, I'm not gonna eat right. What can you do for me? So I got him on this, and for about 3 years, that's all he stayed on until I kept sending about every 3 months. I'd have to send him more, and finally they found a variation of California that they could use, and loved it. Had a lady as a professor at Jacksonville State I put on for high blood pressure, and a week later I got an email late one night saying, well, when's this stuff supposed to work? And I was going to email her the next day. Got up the next morning to email her and had another one set. Never mind, I just took it. It's coming down, and it takes about a week to 2 weeks, and it starts, for most people, it starts to regulate it. Now, you said prostate. This is herb number 2 after New Jersey tea to mechanically reduce the swollen prostate. It does not affect PSA levels, but it mechanically reduces the swelling so that, you know, the guy can urinate without hurting or have to go to the bathroom so often. And one of the things that's really high in this are tannins. So in class we always talk about extrapolating things out, and well, if it's a tannin, what does a tannin do? It dries things up. So well, this might be, if you don't have any other things you like better, you might use this for a wet cough, or to help a nursing mother dry up if she wants to dry up her breast milk. So there's, you know, all sorts of and it's not to say that it will do that. Most likely it will, though. So if you can't find, like, say you've got a nursing mother says, God, the kid's 8 years old, I'm ready to get him off the breast, you know. And I don't have any garden sage, which, you know, really will dry you up fast. You say, well, why don't you try some of this? You know, this might work, or white oak bark, or any other number of plants that are astringents and will dry fluid up. Or if somebody, in this case, has a wet cough and they got lots of fluid in their lungs, well, you know, if this dries up things, this might be something worth trying. It's like when I teach people bow drill, hand drill, every book on wilderness survival you see will say don't use conifers, don't use pines, because there's 2 resins, they won't work. Well, what if you live in Ontario, Canada, and all you've got are conifers? Do you get out in the middle of the woods and just sit down and die? No, you try a conifer, and actually you can make them work. They don't work great, but they can be used. And so you learn to say, well, if I don't have this, what's around that has a similar action because of the chemicals in it? It's like the sumacs, you know. Well, what's in sumac? Tannic acid and gallic acid, which are both extreme drying agents, so they're good for wet coughs. Whereas if you had a dry cough, we've talked about using, you can't use it, onions. Why? Well, if I don't have any onions in my garden, what do I do? Go out in your yard and pick the wild onions, or the wild garlics, because they'll do the same thing. Or if you don't have that, go out and pick the plant I didn't show you up here, sow thistle, which we'll see around in here, because it's a mucus producing herb. You know, and that's one of the reasons it was used to produce milk in pigs. And so if it'll produce milk, most plants are not going to be real, okay, I'm only going to produce milk. They cause the production of fluids. And that's what they're doing.
What about turnips?
Turnips don't do a freaking thing.
Okay.
Other than eat them. No. I don't like them. Sweet gum makes what? Homemade Tamiflu out of the seeds. Ed, did you have you made any yet this year?
Yeah.
Did you? Okay. What color did it end up being?
Brown.
A brownish red, right?
Yeah.
Very, very pretty color actually. But if you don't have, and we saw somewhere where we were not too long ago, a bunch of them still green. Remember?
Yeah.
It was up at it was up at Jeff's place when we did this survival weekend.
Yeah.
And surprised this late in the year. But if you don't have the green seeds, and I'll tell y'all that because y'all know. But all right, you know what Tamiflu is, right? For like swine flu, bird flu. Well, Tamiflu is actually made from a plant called star anise, which is a licorice-smelling herb used in Middle Eastern cooking. You cut it in pieces, cross-section, it looks like a star. That's where it got the name. And each one will have a red seed in it. The chemical in work is called shikimic acid. And they have found that shikimic acid is so actually Tamiflu, when you get prescription medicine, is an herbal medicine. That's all it is, just shikimic acid out of the star anise. But the first plant I ever learned just about was from Tom Bass was sweet gum bark for the flu. And he said, go get you some sweet gum bark and it'll kill the flu graveyard dead. And he didn't know about shikimic acid. I didn't at that time. But that's what it is, because this has shikimic acid in it. I think star anise is like 7% by volume shikimic acid. This is about 3.5 to 4%. But it's still more than enough to do the job. And every other tree in some areas is a sweet gum in the south. So there's no shortage of them. And the seed in the balls, you got 2 seeds in each section. One's a fertile seed, one's an infertile seed. The infertile seed is the most high in shikimic acid, then the fertile seed, then the green ball, then the leaves and the branches. But all of it will work. So you can just take this, boil it up as a tea, or make a tincture out of the young leaves especially, or the inner bark, and you got your own shikimic acid. And it's as if it is as effective as getting a commercial prescription for Tamiflu, easily.
Star anise isn't local.
No, star anise grows mainly in 4 provinces in China, where they grow it, and 2 of them were the ones hit by the earthquake a few years back. And then Merck Company kept buying up all they could, so it actually got in short supply for a while. And but whereas this is everywhere, and it works just as well. You know, you just take the leaves, the bark, boil it up as a tea, and drink as hot as you can stand it. And what it does is it inhibits the ability of the virus to reproduce. So, you know, bone set will kill the virus, whereas this just, it's what it does is in order to, all right, how many remember your high school science class? All right, what's the difference between a virus cell and a regular cell? What does it contain? RNA, not DNA. So in order to reproduce, a piece of that virus flakes off, finds another piece that's flaked off from another one, and that's how they combine their RNA and become the new viral cell. Shikimic acid in rabbit tobacco will do a similar type thing. In my opinion, the way I understand this, inactivates the enzyme that's necessary for that flaking to occur. So if it can't flake off, it can't reproduce. And viruses have a finite life. They don't live forever. So as they're constantly dying off, they're not reproducing more of themselves. And so instead of taking 2 or 3 weeks, week and a half, and the flu's gone. So that's the advantage to it. Rabbit tobacco will inhibit the virus's ability to replicate as well. In fact, one of my next to sweet gum, rabbit tobacco is the next one I would absolutely first go to, and elderberry along with that, because it does the same thing with the ability of that virus to replicate itself. It's like if you give, say somebody's overdosed on narcotics, you give them Narcan, like what, 0.4 micrograms I believe it was, and it occupies that keyhole slot that the narcotic would inhabit. So as long as you're giving them the Narcan periodically, they instantaneously are in withdrawal. They're out of it. But then when it wears off, they can get back in. And that's what the shikimic acid does, is it occupies that, inactivates the enzyme, and so the RNA can't flake off. Now, if you've got somebody that's got mild arthritis, This is just temporary relief. Get the younger leaves at the very terminal end of the branches. Put them in some hot water, make a poultice, and put that on that joint, hot as you can stand it. And for a few hours to a day, it'll loosen everything up, make it feel a lot better. And then I use it in all of the cough formulas. If you ever make a cough formula to bring phlegm up and out of the lungs, make sure you put sweet gum bark in it, because what it does is it acts as a stimulating expectorant, brings all that crap up. This is called pineapple weed because it smells like a pineapple looking smell. I mean pineapple looking smell, pineapple smell.
When it's green?
When it's green. I don't think it would right now.
It kind of does, actually.
Does it still?
A little bit. It's also great tinder because that's how he built fire this morning.
Did he? Okay. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
got a little bit. Not real strong, but yeah, some boots smell like dirt. But when it's real fresh, I mean, it smells just like a nice citrusy pineapple smell.
Yeah, it is
Very, very green. But and believe it or not, it has the yellow flowers on it. Yeah, but they're so tiny. But it works just like any of the hypericums, the St. John's wort, for mild to moderate depression.
You asked the question about St. John's wort.
Sir?
It acts exactly the same. He asked me this morning, did it work the same? And I said, yeah, it does.
In a milder form. Not as good, but close enough. But it only works for mild to moderate depression. Severe depression does not respond well to St. John's wort at all. And if you're real fair-skinned, it can cause photosensitivity. And if you're on birth control pills, it can interfere with the birth control pills. Which is why, as they say, you end up pregnant and depressed. So you gotta watch it. But it does work. And the reason you don't normally use this much is because the main chemical is in the flower. And these are like tiny, tiny flowers. Whereas you find the shrubby St. John's wort, like you've got it all up in Huntsville, up on the mountain there, grows about so tall, has blooms this big. It doesn't take a lot of picking to do the same thing. But it's also good, you can put it up in a liniment form for wounds and bruising. It's pretty good. And we've got St. Andrew's cross, St. Peter's wort, they're all hypericums and they all work. And we've actually got the European St. John's wort that grows, it's naturalized in this country now.
I've been waiting to get it.
Yeah, there's some of the real purple.
Put it at the house.
See how purple the crossvine gets in there? All right, this is one of the sawbriars, one of the smilax. But as we go further down the line, you're going to see some that have a big broad leaf. Some have a narrow leaf, but not as narrow as this. We've got sandbriar, catbriar, bullbriar, carrion flower, which looks like nothing like any of these because it has a big broad leaf, no thorns. Jackson vine, so we got 7 or 8 species or varieties within that species of sawbriar, but they all work the same. Not a bit of difference between any of them. The only difference is leaf shape, fruit color sometimes, and some are more purple to black, some are blacker, and some of them the big rhizomes are bigger, but they work exactly the same. There's no difference. In fact, if you go to any garden shop, you'll find Jackson vines for sale. And that's just a sawbriar that doesn't have a lot of thorns on it and puts beautiful flowers out. So people grow it because they can grow the big leaves and it makes a big shade cover. All right, let's see.
And that's mainly the root though?
Do what?
It's just mainly the root that you use?
It's only the roots you use 99% of the time. The fruit can be used, but it's only used for like a horse throat. You suck on one for a horse throat when you're talking or something. But for medicinal purposes, use the roots. It's what are called. Okay, you know what the difference is between a root and a rhizome? If you look at this thing, you see it looks like these big knobby, pregnant female termites. And those big knobs, those are rhizomes. Then the roots are the little hairs coming off of it. That's the only difference between the two. But that's what you use on that. And that's where you'll get the sarsaparilla tea, root beer comes. That's one of the ingredients in root beer.
Can you eat the edible, the green tips
Right.
of all whole family? Or?
Yes,
Okay.
every bit of them. Even down south in, like, say, with Wetumpka, on there they got black and red bamboo, which is that big around. They call them wait-a-minute vines because the graves say wait a minute. You can even eat the tendrils off them. It's just a bigger variety of smilax. We dug one year doing a wilderness survival week in North Florida. The guy was bulldozing a road through, and he bulldozed one up that it would have been a tough job getting it into the back of my pickup. It was that big. It was a massive roots, and it was all nice beige color, but where the blade split part of it, we came back a few hours later and they'd already started oxidizing and turn red. It was that big a clump of roots. And that's what you use. And to make what they call kunti in Florida, the Muskogee Indians would make, you precipitate the starches out of them, and once you get the starches out, it makes a jelly. It looks sort of like an aspic, and it turns red. Real pretty. It's called red kunti. This is probably, we're talking for respiratory viruses, you know, about 5 or 6 down the line that I would go to for respiratory viruses. You know, it is a eupatorium, just like boneset, Joe Pye weed, queen of the meadow, all of those. And it was mainly traditionally used for typhoid fever.
And what is it called?
Called dog fennel,
Dog
summer cedar. It's Eupatorium capifolium because of the real fine leaves on this.
But you can only use it when it's green.
Use it when it's green, or right now you could use the roots. And very good for respiratory viruses. And see, that's when you start using herbs for viruses. You got to pay attention to what kind of virus am I trying to treat. Am I trying to treat respiratory viruses, a virus like viral meningitis, whatever? Because there are some plants that work like rabbit tobacco, even though it works really well on respiratory viruses. Yeah, there we go. Take a bite of that. Pinch some off and eat them. You'll like the taste. And then, you know, some that work on, you know, all viruses in general, but a lot of them are specific to respiratory or specific to members of the herpes simplex family, like the chickenpox family. And so you've got to learn to hone in on which ones are going to work best for that type of virus. And then you work on, you know, of course, you say, well, if I'm going to do this, you know, which herb works best for the symptoms of that respiratory virus, and then which herb works best to kill the virus or inhibit the ability of the virus to reproduce itself, to replicate. And all. And so that's where it gets, you know, you got to start learning the differences in how they work. Whereas, because if you look at lemon balm and heal-all, real specific for the herpes simplex family, I would not personally be putting those into a respiratory antiviral. Not say they wouldn't help, but why would I do that when I know for a fact that summer cedar, boneset, etc., specifically hone in on that respiratory type of virus, Joe Pye weed especially. So, you know, that's where you got to start differentiating. And it's like making cornbread, you know. Some people like yellow cornmeal, some people like white cornmeal. You know, whatever floats your boat taste-wise, because it makes you more satisfied. And with these, you have to say, well, what's going to work the best for that type of virus? Because not all viruses are created equal.
So is this whole group of plants, the Joe Pye weed,
called eupatoriums?
The eupatoriums down on the 4th or 5th on the list in that grouping, or is there some of them that would be first? Joe Pye, Joe Pye weed.
Okay, if I was to take respiratory viruses, and I was using the eupatorium family. All right, first 2 to consider would be Joe Pye weed, the queen of the meadow, and boneset. Okay. Those would be the first 2, and depending on what I was wanting to do, would change things. You know, was I wanting to work on inhibiting the ability of the virus to replicate, but also at the same time sweat? I'd use boneset. Okay. If I wanted to inhibit the ability of the virus to replicate, but I didn't want to make a sweat, Joe Pye weed.
You wanted to cough. But
I wanted, no, it doesn't. I'm not talking about coughing. This is getting rid of the virus. I'd use the Joe Pye weed, because it's not a big sweater normally. You know, was I just wanting to work on the virus without sweating? I might go to dog fennel. You know, so it all depends on what you're trying to do within even that family, because boneset's going to be bitter. So what does boneset stimulate? The liver. What does the liver do? What production the liver has a big part to play in the functioning of the immune system.
Like cleaning.
So if I want to stimulate the immune system, I would go with the more bitter members of the Eupatorium family, because that's what they do. They stimulate the immune system. If I wasn't trying to stimulate the immune system, Joe Pye weed, Queen of the Meadow, the summer boneset, or this, because they're not bitter herbs. All depends on what you're trying to do.
Let me ask you a question. Let's say you had a person that had a problem with an overstimulated immune system, like
Rheumatoid arthritis.
What would you do to balance that?
Are we talking about for somebody's got a viral infection?
Yeah.
I would not use boneset because it is a bitter tonic. I would not use, even though they're not boneset, Eupatoriums, we tend to use them a lot together, hyssops, because they're bitter tonics. I would use nothing that stimulated the liver.
Right.
Now, I would also look at using poke root, because poke root modulates the immune system. So even though we look upon it as a liver herb, it is stimulating the liver only in a sense that it's causing it to function properly and causing the immune system to function properly. So, and it's a powerful antiviral just by itself for any type of virus. In fact, if I was to travel and take nothing else with me to keep from being sick, it would be poke root tincture, because if it touches it, it kills it. But, and even though it stimulates the liver, it stimulates it to function properly. That's why you can use poke root especially for rheumatoid arthritis as well as osteoarthritis, because it acts as an anti-inflammatory for the symptoms, but at the same time it helps to reset the immune system. You know, like, why do you have rheumatoid? She doesn't have rheumatoid, and he has rheumatoid and you don't have rheumatoid. We should all have rheumatoid, or not all have rheumatoid. You know, why? Essential hypertension. Why has he got it? And nobody knows. But what it does is it tells the immune system to quit attacking itself. And so you can use it along with summer boneset, one of those that are antiviral, or even, you know, go to the lemon balm and heal all if you want to try that, and do the same thing without, you know, causing a stimulating effect on the liver.
Does poke root relieve any of the symptoms of autoimmune disorders, the autoimmune portion, or it just doesn't make it worse?
No, it relieves, because what it does is it resets the immune system to where people can see, you know, not everybody responds the same as everybody, but for the people it works for, they end up with significant relief from it.
And when do you harvest poke root?
Year round. Yeah, year round. It doesn't matter when. You know, you'll see in some books say don't harvest fresh, don't harvest dry, blah blah, because it's too strong. That's a bunch of baloney. Once it's
tinctured up to that.
Once it's tinctured, whether it's fresh, the only difference between using it fresh and dried is the strength of your tincture, because you're going from like a 2-to-1 ratio, you know, or a 5-to-1, and that really does not mean anything. People make herbal medicine too complicated, and part of it has to do with making themselves seem real mysterious or very physician-y, as I say it. You know, you got two in this quick soapbox. You got two groups of people in this field. Well, you got a third group, others just don't care. But you got the basic herbalists who are tied to the land, and then you've got the people like with American Herbalist Guild, you know, a large portion of them that are becoming a guild, almost like a union, where they want to be accepted at the next level to being physicians. And so everything with them has got to be double-blind, placebo-controlled study with the plants. It's got to be specific formulations with everything, or you're looked upon as being an ignorant hillbilly herbalist. Okay? But what they've done is they all started out as herbalists because they were helped, or somebody in their family was helped with herbs or alternative medicine, and then they got too big for their britches. So they want what they're trying to do, and this is just not the AHG, but this is a lot of groups that are trying to get licensure for herbalists, are trying to push everybody else out because you're ignorant if you don't fall within their club. Mm-hmm. But then again, you take them out, they couldn't tell you summer cedar if it was flapping them in the face, you know. And they're herbal pharmacists, and they're getting, and some of them are A lot of them are becoming guilty of the same thing that modern doctors are, of having a reductionist approach to everything, bring it all down to one chemical. You know, like hypericin. Make sure that's not somebody lost. That's me. And they're getting away from the fact, well, you know, for example, what works in yellow root as an antibiotic? One of the main chemicals is berberine. But if you just separate berberine out from the yellow root, you may or may not have something as effective as if you're using the whole plant, because you know, back in the 40s and 50s is when all the synthetics came in. So a lot of plants got dropped from the pharmacopoeia because they could not find the chemical in them that worked. Well, that was 50, 60 years ago. If they came back with modern machinery, did the same test, they might discover the chemical that's causing it to work. But each generation says, well, our technology is the best you got, and if it doesn't find it, it can't exist. So they're saying the same thing now. If we can't find it, it doesn't exist. And 50 years from now, they might find that same chemical that does it. But we seem to think that, you know, everything can be isolated off. It's like with sassafras. You know, they isolated saffron off, gave laboratory rats bucket loads of the stuff, and they had elevated liver enzymes, so they took saffron off the market from sassafras products because they could cause cancer. You know, but it was, you know, you don't drink just saffron when you make sassafras tea. Anyway. Oh yeah, I was going to the crossfire. All right. Terry, you got your first assignment. Write this word down. R-A-U-W-O-L-F-I-A. Anybody ever heard of this plant? It's from India. It's called Rawolfia. You're going to look that up, and we're going to talk about that. All I'll say is this: it's used as an antipsychotic commercially. It makes a chemical called reserpine. And it's actually a rather toxic chemical.
As good as this?
Or is this as good as it? That's the question.
This is better, probably. No,
this is crossvine.
Show you in a minute.
Right here. This is the one that back when Tommy Bass was a kid, they were plowing with horses and mules. And you had the horse or mule just plowed to death, the kidneys shut down, wouldn't eat, you know, just about on its last legs. They would take crossvine, and they put it, and they put pipsissewa, or rat's vein, which worked on the kidneys, in their feed. 3 days later, they're back plowing again. So he figured if it's good for a horse, it's good for man, and started recommending it to people. And, you know, 3 or 4 days after drinking the tea, which tastes good, you know, you got more energy, more stamina. And people will always tell you, they say, well, I feel better. Well, about 2 years ago, this guy that's going to Bastyr University, which is a big naturopathic university in Washington, came down. We were looking, and he took, I sent him some, and they actually did gas chromatography on this and a couple of other studies, and found reserpine in crossvine.
What is that?
Reserpine is an antidepressant, antipsychotic. It's in Rawolfia, which is a plant that grows in India, which is one of the first antipsychotic medicines commercially made. I mean, as a pharmaceutical. But the reserpine, it's the only other plant they've ever come across. Now it's through Bastyr, is in this plant, but it's a very tiny little amount, and so that's why after 3 or 4 days drinking it, you got more stamina, more energy, but you feel better because of the reserpine in it. Now, describe the backside?
It's smooth and tan.
Smooth and tan, leathery.
Yeah.
All right, that's a false turkey tail. A true turkey tail is going to be thick.
But you can still kind of see the pores.
Yeah, it feels like it. It's all flaked off, but yeah. Whereas a true turkey tail is going to be thicker, and it's going to have tiny little microscopic pores that you really got to put your eyes on it to see. But these are leathery. Now these are also medicinal. They have anti-cancer, immune modulating properties, but not like turkey tail. And turkey tail mushrooms, if y'all see these, well, here, pass them up. This is a very common one, but you'll see all these little bands in it like a turkey tail, like feathers. But the back side of it is leathery and smooth. no pores. That's a false turkey tail. And they can vary in color from this to brown to... No. That's called a brown jelly.
Right. That's what. Well, it won't necessarily depend. It'll be white when you see it's a real old.
Okay.
You still feel how this one was thicker before.
All right, now pass that around. All right, wait a minute.
Is this kind of like the lichen?
No. The turkey tail family is a specific for breast and uterine cancer. It works in general on all cancers. Also as an immune modulator. Now, the fungus she's holding around, if you want to be adventurous, take your bite out of it. It's not rotted. That's just the way it looks.
Take a bite out of that.
Yeah. Huh?
Am I going to regret this?
Go for it.
No.
I'm not much of a
No. When we get back, we'll look it up and see what it is.
It's like anything.
No, and that's what you're going to notice. There's no real taste to it, but you've eaten this mushroom in another form a lot if you eat Chinese cooking. They're called tree ears.
Oh, they're worms.
No, I won't read. That's protein. And they're called tree ears or wood ears, and they put them in Chinese cooking for texture because it'll get a little bit of chewiness to it, but there's no flavor. It takes on the flavor of whatever you cook it in. And these are actually, the members of this family are real good medicinal plants.
Anybody else want to
And you'll see
see what this feels like?
you'll see the tree ears on trees, and it looks like a little brown monkey ear. I mean, it's shaped like an ear even. And in fact, its botanical name is like Aural auriculus, you know. This is the time of year you'll find them. They're called aborted entelomas, which basically what it's saying is that see how this one was, eventually you could extrapolate that out into a cap coming up. They abort the process and just warp. Get a good picture of that too. And it's a real good edible mushroom.
Now that he said dog turd,
So how you cook it?
Pretty neat. Thanks. It's like any mushroom. You can saute them, fry them, whatever. But what I would do is to double check what I say is when you get home, Google aborted enteloma, so you don't feel like I'm poisoning you. But that's what they're called. And there's another mushroom that acts weird like that, and we find them here in pine thickets under the pine straw, called a lobster mushroom. And it's where another fungus will attack. Usually it's a rusula, and it takes over and morphs into looking like a big orangey claw looking sometimes mushroom, and it tastes like lobster. Of course, these do not taste like Hostess cupcakes, but they're good.
Check one.
I think so. Yeah. See how they're right here? They're coming off the roots.
Yeah.
And I think they're just washed out and old. They could be. It could be something else.
They're all down to there.
Yeah. All right. This is actually an orchid. Alabama has, I think, 30 something or more species of orchids, but they're all ground-dwelling orchids. They don't look fancy like the kind you get in the store. But this is one called a crane fly orchid. A lot of times people in the country call it one of the Adam and Eve roots. It's also called putty root because the rhizomes, in fact, Ed, you got your digger if you want to dig a piece, somebody. The little bulbs on it, when you crush them, are sticky, and you putty pottery together with it. Yeah, it acts like putty. You know, like your putty broken pottery. Like you drop the plate, you put it together. And that's last year's seed head flower stalk. Okay. They'll be white.
You're getting to it. There it is.
Okay. You can pass that around and look at it. And when you get through, if you crush it between your fingers, it'll get slightly tacky. But it's actually an orchid. No, it has it'll have that stem with little tiny seeds on it, little blooms and little seeds. You actually have an orchid that people have in their yards a lot in summertime called ladies' tresses. And it's an actual orchid too.
And the blooms at the same time. With a stalk with blooms on it, and all the leaves.
Yeah, just like a lot of the onions, the like ramps and stuff. You know, the leaves die back before the blooms are on it, and vice versa. That's it. It's all into these woods this time of year. The Adam and Eve root, the true Adam and Eve root, looks the same, but it doesn't have purple underneath usually.
Oh, okay.
And
more leaves.
yeah, they're all into here and right here, and it's pleated. The leaves are pleated, have little bumps in them. You'll notice. It's not used a lot in white herbal medicine. Among blacks, it was used as an aphrodisiac and for gambling. And if you look at if you dig a bunch of it up.
Oh, I wondered what he meant by gambling.
It's to increase your luck. And it was an aphrodisiac because if you look at it, you'll see a chain of those bulbs, and it's Adam going into Eve. Adam going into Eve. It's a sexual connotation to it, and so it was used as an aphrodisiac. You'll still see Tommy. His main teacher was a black midwife. So a lot of what he taught me actually came from a black folklore. Not all of it, but a large percentage. So I'll get together with some of these old black herb doctors that are still, a few of them still around, or talking to some of the ladies in the lunchroom at my school, and I know what they're talking about. Like I said, boarhog root. White people don't know about boarhog root normally. That's a black herb. And somebody's asking me about it at school, and I said, yeah, watch this. And I told old Miss Kurt, you know, about 80 years old. I said, Miss Kurt, you ever heard of boarhog root? Yeah, she said, oh yeah. They knew it. Didn't have to explain it to her. Nope. Come on now. Sumac. Which sumac?
Smooth.
Smooth sumac. See? Nice and smooth. And see all the white on it? That wild yeast for making sourdough? Works just fine. You can always tell it by the nodes for next year's blooms. Or next year's flower stalks. Not flower stalks. Leaves. Branches. What part do you use?
The whole plant.
All of it. Okay. You. Tell me. What are you going to use it for?
The berries for diarrhea. Just as
You can.
tonic.
Very astringent. What else?
The berries.
Huh?
Oh, sore throat.
Sore throat.
Good source of vitamin C.
Mouth ulcers.
Vitamin C, mouth ulcers, canker sores. The kidneys. One of my favorite kidney herbs. What else? We were talking about it earlier. On the road before we dropped down the hill. Dog fennel was, what does dog fennel do? It's an antiviral. This is one of the better antiviral herbs you can use. Then if you use the branches, they're antiviral as well, but even higher in tannins for anything you'd want to stop bleeding, internal bleeding, diarrhea, mouth ulcers, canker sores.
You can chop that up and put it in the salve.
Whatever you say.
We put it in the last
Yeah, it'll be very good for that. Now, if I'd grabbed that and went, ow, it would have been prickly ash. It was. Another eupatorium. This is the summer bone set, the other queen of the meadow. It has a hole, remember, shotgun in it? Not bitter. So if I was wanting to use an antiviral that wasn't bitter, this would be one I'd use the roots. It's also good for another kidney herb and very good for diabetes. A 1-year-old root of this looks like a ginseng root. Like that looks like ginseng. And they learn to not get taken by diggers.
Poke root.
But nice size poke root. And we'll talk about that when we make the salve.